Welcome, everybody. Hello. My name is Hannah Jo. I'm the guest interviewer for District216. We have some new friends tonight, these two in these beautiful purple chairs, and as well as a few others in the audience. So I just want to shout out to District216. We're the Psychedelic Social Club of downtown Santa Barbara, and we aim to represent the intersection of art, music, cannabis, and psychedelics. And we host these amazing events weekly here at the District House. Sometimes it's a guest interview, sometimes it's a film screening, sometimes it's a roundtable circle conversation. We like to involve our community and give people in this realm a voice. And we also have a quarterly event called the Marquee Event, and the upcoming one is here in January. So for those of you that are new here, welcome. For those of you who are visiting us again, welcome. And I am here to happily introduce Matthew Baldwin and Mark Shortt. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
Totally. So I would love to hear from both of you who you are as individual and who you are in relationship to each other. And you can choose which one of you feels like sharing first.
I guess I'll start. Great. So I'm first and foremost, I usually go by Matt. I'm first and foremost a musician. I've been a musician for 30 years, and have done that, in all the ways that you do. It's like recording, touring, and putting out records. So, and then in the past 10 years, been working as a psychotherapist, and 5 years ago started working with Mark, developing stuff at the intersection of psychedelics and music, and really the sort of zeroing in on clinical best practices for the psychedelic dimensions the musical dimensions of psychedelic work. Yeah, I think that's it.
And I'm also a musician and a clinician, and have been doing specifically ketamine therapy since 2018. I started studying psychedelics more formally in around 2010. I'd say informally long before then. And the way that Matt and I met is that I read an article online that was about the audio harm reduction guide to psychedelic therapy. And I was reading this, and I really resonated with it. It was incredibly well written, and the ideas were clear and so important, I thought. And so I reached out to Matt just out of the blue, and we met up in downtown San Francisco and hit it off from there. And that conversation has been continuing to this day, and this is where it's come to so far.
Yeah, and that meeting was marked by a bunch of incredible synchronicities. And so we've been following Omen logic ever since then. It's like one of our guiding principles for the stuff that we develop.
Yeah, super cool. I love that. And I feel the psychedelic space and the medicine space gives us greater access to that synchronicity and that omen.
For sure.
Will you define what that is to you, the omen logic?
Well, it's very personal, but I think everyone knows what it is for them, which it's like... it's following that sense of something deeper emerging through the mundane. And oftentimes it speaks the most loudly for me when things are lined up and on the right track and heading towards something promising that feels like has a feeling of the flavor of destiny to it.
Yeah, very cool. I feel that. Yeah. So I understand you both are musicians, and I do want to better understand what that actually involves, like instruments or song. So I would love to hear your musician artistry path before it met the psychedelic space. And maybe there was a pivotal moment where your focus started to merge those two things that you're passionate about.
Well, I think I was always really interested in long-form instrumental music. So I was always interested in music that if I could find a track that was 10 minutes or 20 minutes long with no lyrics, I was really that always had some fascination for me. So I think like examples of that are like the guitar solo on Suzy Q by Creedence Clearwater, where it's like 8 minutes long, or the first Black Sabbath record. I was always looking for these periods where the instrumental expanded. And then, so my background is in American string music, like folk music, finger-picking guitar, and punk music. And so I played in punk bands, and I also did a lot of recording of like solo guitar stuff, essentially, but in the sort of the blues and American folk traditions. But I think the fascination with long-form instrumental music, it led me, especially after college, to get, like, I got a job in a record store, and everyone was like, well, what the hell are you doing? But it was really important because I was obsessively researching something that is, at this point, very important to our work. I mean, it's actually central to it, which was testing obsessively over and over and over again how my sensorium reacted to different types of music. So I think what I was doing was a type of journeying, something that felt like psychedelic journeying, but just with music. I mean, and this is something that you can do. I think Helen Bonney, who worked with Stan Grof, she developed this, to a large degree of just doing inward journeying, going into impressions, visionary stuff, just through music. So that's been an obsession that has now turned into a line of work, because it's really these are things that underpin music-centered psychedelic integration, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, my journey started off in a way that I think was somewhat typical for the kinds of schools for where I grew up, which is Victoria, BC in Canada. And, at this age, you start on this instrument, and then you get the option to do this one. And so, elementary school and middle school and high school were characterized by just cycling through these instruments. But in the middle of high school, one of the teachers decided to implement a music composition lab. So, in the 90s, with the state-of-the-art computers back then, which are things we wouldn't even consider really very functional computers now, but he set up this whole music composition lab that had, MIDI integration in the keyboards and ways that you could compose on these computers, and sheet music and everything. And so that was my introduction to kind of composition, but also the interface of technology and music. Mm-hmm. Of course, he would make us perform our own compositions, which was terrifying, but a good experience. But what it really did is it clued me into kind of that edge of technology and how that can advance an expressive form. And, I think similar to psychedelics in some way, although, of course, psychedelics don't require any technology, right? That, I think an altered or an expanded state of consciousness is actually very natural to human beings and the human condition. And then adding in music and voice and singing and drumming, those have been around probably as long as humans have thought to use them. But we're in an era now where we can leverage and use technology to enhance or expand that experience, and especially with recorded music. So I think that marriage of technology and expanded states of consciousness is something that I started to clue into around that time, and has really been an exciting journey to follow since then.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for giving us a little glimpse into your background with that. And I have a question for you, Matt. Did you use the word sensorium?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. I'm not familiar with that word, but I made sense of it in the context you used it. And it made me think that many people have probably had the experience of being moved by music, and meaning that there's some sort of emotion or sensory shift in their body that they feel and become aware of. And is that what you were meaning by that word, or is there another way that you can describe it?
Yeah, your sensorium is like it's all of your collected senses as a unity working together. Mm-hmm. That's how I understand it. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, and I think, I use that word intentionally because I think that, when you encounter music in an expanded state, or if you use it in order to achieve an expanded state, like it does it does start to activate a bunch of different senses that you wouldn't think, right? It becomes visual, it becomes kinesthetic, you start to feel tingles, all this stuff, right? So it's not just going into your ears and doing the sort of the one thing that we conventionally understand it to do.
Mm-hmm. So it's my guess that your music-centered psychedelic, maybe preparation and integration, invites people into that sensorium before and probably after their medicine experience, because that connection to the senses and the body's experience is essential to really receive the benefit of that altered state.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So will you introduce to us what the music-centered psychedelic integration is all about and its principles and practices, or any origin story that feels relevant to share?
For sure. What do you think, Mark? You want to take this one?
Well, I'll just start off by kind of the question that you invited us into about the preparation and the integration. And it's true, part of the preparation process is using music to invite someone into deepening that inner sensory awareness. And so with that, and using the music to kind of train and elicit that, it creates this practice, if you will, of a navigating of consciousness through, like Matt said, the sensorium, and kind of training you to attune to that and tune into that level of awareness. And so that's where we start, is by introducing that level of attention before any medicine, before any drug, simply with music. And then we bring that into the medicine experience itself, and that previous experience is deepened in that, obviously. And then afterwards, in the integration process, we use that once again, and that not only kind of maintains the ability to be in that state, but also recalls some of the insights and experiences that they had during their medicine experience or their journey experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that re-listening to music, I'd say that the preparation phase is really important. So really what we say about music-centered psychedelic integration, or MCPI, is it's more music throughout every phase of psychedelic psychotherapy. And so in using it to prepare, I think you can almost use it as a kind of assessment tool. Like, you can use music to do a kind of inner check-in to see what it evokes, because a lot of the time the music is a kind of a screen onto which you can see yourself projecting things. So, and then I think also, again, kind of in a way that's reminiscent of the Bonnie method, the music can prepare you for deep inner journeys. So, and you can find yourself journeying and responding to this kind of dry run without any psychedelic medicines on board. So in a way, you kind of create a flow of musical experience, a through line that starts with preparation through the active session, the active drug or medicine session, and then into the preparation session. And in the preparation session, we say that re-listening, we developed this with ketamine, and I think it's really special, it's really important, because ketamine is short acting, right? It's typically about an hour to an hour and a half long. And what that allowed us to do is, for re-listening, is that you don't have to re-listen to a 5 or 6 hour psilocybin or MDMA playlist. You can re-listen to, in the course of one session, that's typically about an hour and a half to 2 hours, you can listen to the entire playlist. And we say that that's the royal road to integration. It's this incredibly evocative thing, and it's like the purloined letter. It's like it was sitting there in plain sight for everyone to see. Everyone who's had a psychedelic experience and listened to specific music during that experience knows that when you go back and listen to that piece of music, the hair stands up on the back of your neck, the visions come back, a lot of the insights come back, and I think that's one of the main things that we're leveraging with MCPI is that is actually an incredible opportunity for integration. So it's not that listening back to the music that was previously used in a playlist is just a fun or interesting thing to do. It's like it's mandatory. That's a big part of the practice.
For sure. And the MCPI is something that, from my understanding, you offer individuals that you work with.
Yes.
Yeah. So for the audience, you too have developed MCPI, which is a preparation and integration method that's music-centered. And you're saying that the music is the through line through the experience that supports people in embodying maybe the insight or the expanded consciousness that they received through their ketamine treatment. And I wonder if there's any physiological or biochemical details that you want to share about how music has that effect and why you would consider it the royal road and essential for integration.
It's a really good question, and I don't think we'll get too deep into this in this talk because
Sure.
There's a lot of kind of the research and the science that informs that, and I think there's a lot of other interesting things that I'd love for us to cover in this talk. And that stuff is accessible online. You can go and you can search it. But there's a lot of research done that supports state-dependent memory. And so music is part of that state. And so you can consider a state of how I feel, but it's also a set of external and environmental parameters, sound being one of those things. And then there's also a lot of research that talks about the effect of sound on the human physiology. So on the body, on the neurology, on the ways that cells behave. And so that stuff's all available and deeply interesting. I would encourage anyone to go out and look at that. And so the idea just of synthesizing those things on that material level that you asked about is kind of sets the foundation for, this makes sense that when we reintroduce these environmental factors, sound and music, that it will help to elicit and amplify any of the beneficial changes that have happened and maintain them. And I think on a whole other level beyond the physiological, there's that kind of psycho-emotional experience that's happening that can be in resonance with the music. And so you can think of that as memory, you can think of that as association, or it might be happening on some other level. I think the mechanism of it is not as important as the idea that the effect of it is to really reconnect someone with that state, not just where they were, but have that state be part of their present perception going forward into the future. And that's why I think it's such a powerful technique and method.
Yeah, and we look forward to getting to the point where we can actually have studies done on it. I mean, this is something we've been developing in our respective and now combined private practices through the Ketamine Providers Network. And but at this point, it's more based on things that we've observed and codified into the system. But we look forward to more, validation by other parties too.
Yeah, for sure. I look forward to that for you guys as well, and that research will be very interesting. And who knows, maybe that research presentation will be the 100th or 150th event here at the District House.
Right on.
Yeah. I want to tune back into what you said around the emotional range that someone has access to with the musical and psychedelic experience, and how you use the music to bring them back to that body-mind remembrance of that emotional state so they can have access to that more regularly. And can you name a few of the states of beingness or feeling that people find? Is it peace and relaxation, or?
I could name some, but I think it would be limited in the sense that there's such a vast range, almost unlimited range. But I think what might be more helpful is just introducing the idea that sound and music can be both, these are kind of nervous system therapeutic words, activating and regulating at the same time. And so why that I think is important is because you can experience these combined states of emotional, physiology, etc. in new ways. So if there's something that brings up both grief and peace, now you can start seeing the potential for that to be deeply healing and therapeutic and expansive, or fear and courage, or whatever it is, just think of, for each individual, I really believe and have seen how different and variable it is. So I couldn't say these are the standard things that people go through, but I think the standard or the similar effect and reason why it's effective is because of that principle that it can bring up these varied emotional states and physiological states in a way and over a time period that gives someone a new experience of them and of themselves experiencing them. Mm-hmm. And that is what I've seen to be so profound in psychedelic work in general, and using the music in this intentional way in particular.
Yeah, super cool. I understand what you're saying with the activated and regulated. It's like being able to feel your aliveness, but also maintain like a relaxed and regulated system. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say I love how you said that, feeling your aliveness, because I think that's exactly what we want, is to connect people to this sense of aliveness, feeling alive and feeling expressed and feeling deeply connected to themselves, which allows them to feel deeply connected to all of life, ideally. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the word activated is sometimes also used around becoming dysregulated or like entering a more trauma response area. So yeah, I'm embracing and feeling the aliveness, but in a way that is still grounded and embodied. And what I receive from that is people have gone through this experience and have a transformed perspective on certain aspects of their emotional landscape, where maybe previously they judged their grief or they made that experience wrong, but now coming out of this experience, they can hold grief and peace, or something of that balance.
Yeah, they can hold their own complexity in like a very deep way, which oftentimes it's this kind of, you could call it like a negative capability, which is holding two seemingly paradoxical feelings or thoughts at the same time. And I think that that's oftentimes, you see this this sort of this experience that people have in psychedelic, therapy experiences, where it's sort of like zooming up and putting, what typically just looks like suffering into this larger contextualized map of like, oh, there's all this other stuff there, and I'm all of that, and then so much more, that's really unfathomable.
Yeah, for sure.
And if I could just add one thing, is that I think music has the ability to do that because it is this form of expression that's, both structured but also abstract, and in that sense universal. Whereas we live a lot in kind of an analytical, in a linear way, in a way that's based in language as a reflection of that. And language is great at categorizing and dividing and separating, which is also necessary to survive life. And I think music is able to integrate in that way. If we look at music as a language, as a form of expression, of communication, it is able to be integrative in that way, and so helps exactly what you were saying, Matt, that reconnection, that sense of wholeness, the embodiment of a complexity.
Yeah, awesome. So I want to better understand the details of how you are offering MCPI and all that you offer in the current state of your offering.
So we run a few different things. We have the first thing we do is the Ketamine Providers Network, which is it's essentially kind of like boutique style ketamine psychotherapy that's either offered remotely or in people's homes. And in doing that, we're working with certain people. But we found that there was something missing in that. And we feel like issues of class and access are huge. This is something that everyone's talking. I mean, at CIIS, they were talking about it in our training. Like, how do we make this accessible? How do we make this affordable? So in response to that, we did a lot of thinking about how to work with a kind of a group model and to really to drop the price, dramatically. So next month we're launching something in Echo Park in LA called the Los Angeles Community Ketamine Clinic. And so that will be a low-fee group model ketamine clinic, essentially, and that'll be in person, and that'll be working more with intramuscular treatments. And then off to the side is something that often we use within the Ketamine Providers Network private practice. We do MCPI, which is a very specific modality for PrEP integration. It can it's interesting. It's kind of a both-and proposition where it's like MCPI, it can kind of be an adjunct to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy or psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, or it can take the place of psychedelic psychotherapy. Because psychedelic psychotherapy, typically it's in the PrEP and integration phases, it's a lot of talking. And so we make room for talking, analytical stuff, meaning making, but we also leave a lot of room for listening to and responding to music. So yeah, that's how MCPI exists, and we're in the process of developing, weekend workshops and groups for MCPI specifically, and then we also offer clinicians trainings and standard CAP groups.
Right on. Yeah.
And maybe I'll just add one thing that I'm particularly excited about is to make this work open to a wider audience. We want to do MCPI specific groups, and ultimately the plan is to involve performers and live musicians in that, and really kind of create the experience on a whole other level of interactivity where it's not simply recorded music being played, although we love that and do it all the time, but there are live performers, and then so the music that is coming forth is very much in that moment and of that moment. And so that's really an exciting thing for us.
Yeah,
it's coming soon.
Yeah, it's super cool. Haven't heard anyone else discussing that dream, so I'm excited for you both and celebrating and congratulating you on the project that's opening and launching next month. Yeah. I want to revisit and clarify the principles and the practices of MCPI, and I don't feel like those were explicitly outlined, so I want to give space to name them now if you would like to.
Yeah, as a set of practices, there's the sort of the overall shape of an MCPI treatment, which is, preparation, active session, treatment, and then that goes into a rolling basis, for however many sessions. It depends on how the person's responding oftentimes. And so that involves the pre-listening, the re-listening. And then we're in the process of developing, this is going to be kind of like a 2.0 thing, because we're writing a book right now, but we're developing also what we call advanced listening practices. And so those involve oftentimes, we've talked about working with digesting playlists down, sort of condensing them down from previous experiences. So maybe taking playlists from 5 or 6 experiences and taking the most powerful ones, digesting those down into a playlist that someone then listens to. So it's kind of like concentrating the most powerful pieces of music. And then, Mark, you had some interesting ideas about repeated listening within one session. I think you were talking about braided loops and,
Yeah, so there's, if to kind of get further into this, your standard approach is to maybe create a playlist or do live mixing during a psychedelic session, but there are ways to use music in kind of this this interesting way where you can actually have someone listen to a song many times, or several different songs many times, or you take several albums and then you weave them together. And so there's when you look at the music as the medicine, there's ways to use it which are non-linear, and so you're exposing people to this experience of the music in a way that they wouldn't typically do. But within the psychedelic space, you can hear something more than once on different levels, and it lands in a different way. And so we think of that as kind of a recursive form of listening that deepens your experience of listening to a song and listening to a music. So there are a number of ways to do that. Like Matt said, one is the braided, where you take a few different palettes and you weave them together. Another is the cyclical, where you play a set of songs over and over again, and they'll each have kind of different use cases, and they'll each have different effects. And so that's another thing we plan on talking about and publishing at one point, and using for specific cases. So yeah, it's just an example to say that there are kind of some methods within the method that we're excited about employing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's others that are kind of in development or being tested. And I think all of these things are done with, like, ideally a real DJ's sensitivity to the feeling in the room. So, like it's not like we sort of abstractly developed some idea of like what's going to be good for the patient, and then just apply it to them. It's more like it's a kind of an exploration, and you're constantly getting feedback, and you're also as a psychedelic clinician, like, you need to be ready to pivot at any moment, because I think this is something that comes out of there's a tradition within psychedelic work, especially going back to Groff, who I honor, but I think there's certain things which, there's a tradition which is that if a piece of music is evoking something difficult, it's your job to sort of gut it out and maybe white knuckle through it, right? I think that if you as the clinician are able to sort of like check in, attune to the person, feel into it, and trust what they're telling you, that they will know the difference about whether that's something that they should deepen into and experience, and there's maybe something really valuable on the side of that difficult experience, or if you're just re-traumatizing them, right? Because that happens, and this is something that was happening with research protocols for working with music, where it's kind of like they wanted to control for music as a variable, so the music was the same every time. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, someone would be like, this music is unbearable. I can't stand this piece of music. And they're like, this is the protocol. I got to stick with it, right? And so, you do hear about these cases where people emerge from a session like that feeling rattled, feeling like not feeling attuned to the therapist, not feeling like the experience was, feeling like it was dysphoric or not a good experience for them. So I think anytime we talk about these techniques, it's something that we definitely are checking in with who we're working, and in order to see how they're responding, and and then also trusting our own senses, kind of like putting our heads and feeling systems together to do this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're offering a very customized treatment, moment to moment, that also empowers like the patient's choice. And I feel like that's what you were describing. Like no one wants to leave their medicine experience feeling imposed upon by bad or music that was bringing out a sense of discomfort that wasn't properly attuned to. So I think that's valuable for any healing modality and healing approach.
Yeah. You can think of it like a skilled DJ would be able to sense how a crowd is receiving the music. The skilled therapist would be able to sense how the person is receiving that music in their journey. And it's powerful to have a deep experience of music on one's own. I believe it can be even more powerful to have that deep experience of music with someone else. Mm-hmm. And so if everyone in the room is resonating in the same way with the music, the idea is that it can really amplify that experience. And then there's also a sense of witnessing, even if it's not explicit. It's that person was there in their journey experiencing the music in a certain way, and there's someone there attuned to them, sensing how they were experiencing that. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is that moment tends to be very powerful in the integration as well.
Yeah, it seems like that grants someone a validity, that they weren't alone also, that their experience is valid because it was seen and experienced by another. And I can imagine that will like accelerate the integration.
Absolutely, as well as a sense of connection, which we believe is really foundational to this work and to what psychedelic therapy can do in general, is deepen that sense of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there were certain teachers in the training program that we both went through in San Francisco who said that, the most important part of psychedelic work is the relational part. So it's what happens with the music and the psychedelic experience, and how that connects the person to the other person they're with. That's maybe not our specific line of focus, but I don't forget that I was taught that. That's an important way to look through it. I wanted to go off one more thing you said, which is something that we said to each other for years over and over, is the music is the medicine. The music is the medicine, and the psychedelic merely opens us up to the medicine. We may not be 100% right about that, but there's something true about that. And just try listening to the wrong music under it's like, and see what happens. Try listening to the most exquisitely curated, sensitively curated music. I mean, it's night and day, the experiences you've had. I mean, it's been proven that people have better clinical outcomes when the music is really thoughtfully curated. So I mean, and these are measurable in terms of symptom reduction. We don't always think about it in those terms, but that's an important part of our work too. So it was funny. We went and saw Steve Roach play in LA at this church, this incredible ambient musician who's been making first-rate, psychedelic journey music since the 80s. And after, he's really generous with his time. So after he's done playing, we walked right up to him and we started talking. And we started talking to him. We were saying, oh yeah, we work with ketamine and this, and he's like, yeah, that's really interesting. He's like, yeah, of course, that's real. Yeah. He's like, but you understand that music is the medicine, right? And we realized, he's a patron saint of MCPI. He was right there. He was there, articulating it before we even knew it, and we never heard him say it before, but that's how this works, right? These ideas almost belong to the noosphere, and when we both just happened to tap into it.
Absolutely, and it's also, to me, exciting what that implies, because even beginning with psychedelic substances and medicine sessions, etc., they can take the practices of MCPI and the listening and continue to do the work. At one point, a substance may be really helpful and maybe a catalyst, and it may not be needed. And so the idea that the music is the medicine and the psychedelic is supportive to that experience allows for so much to happen in the therapeutic arc, because now they have these practices that they can do, and they can do them almost any time and continue to go down that road of expansion.
Mm-hmm. And one thing we didn't get to is principles. So there was practices and principles. Principles, I would say there's something that we want to underpin, which is that we want that underpins MCPI for us, which is musical culture, and then personal musical knowledge and taste, and musical technology. Like, these are all important parts of it. So I was acutely aware, starting being at 12 years old, watching him play guitar in our local punk rock scene that we had. This friend of mine, Philip here, I was really aware that music emerges out of the collective, right? It's like it comes out of people being in rooms together, right? And it was like this really earthy experience. You could smell everyone's armpits, and there was a sense of electricity in the room, and you can't fake that, And so that's what this comes out of, right? And so I think after we've been through this sort of collective trauma, head injury of confinement during COVID, we have to find ways back into rooms with each other, and this is how musical culture emerges, right? And then there's something about something that we seek to develop as clinicians, and that we want to train other clinicians to do, which is to develop your own personal, first off, musical knowledge, which is the larger sphere, and then within that is personal musical taste, which is what you respond to. And so those are things we seek to develop in ourselves, and then through the process of MCPI, trying to develop that in the people who we're providing MCPI for. So it's like this sort of deeper sense of who you are through your musical tastes, and exploring your own panorama of emotions through the music you listen to, and what that shows you about yourself. And then musical technology, that's another part. I think that there's we live in the digital age, and what that means is that music either totally sucks, how it sounds, or it sounds amazing, right? And there's not a lot of, I think the analog, when things were analog, lo-fi or distorted analog sound could sound pretty good, There could be something charming or kind of like velvety about it, right? It's not true with digital. Digital distortion is really unpleasant. So that's another part of the sort of the principles behind MCPI is maintaining sound quality and thoughtful playlist construction as a part of setting, as in set and setting for psychedelic work. So these are the things that are kind of underneath MCPI. It's like. And I think a lot of that has to do with, for me, my response to algorithms and feeling nudged and feeling manipulated into this is what you should get into. It's a completely different experience than someone in middle school taking me over to their house and sharing something with me on a cassette, right? Which there was a warmth in the room. There was a human element. There was a sense of mystery, And so there's something human that we're trying to maintain and to convey through MCPI.
And I think the potential opportunity here is for interpersonal connection and maybe even community. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is, as we've been saying, a real foundation of healing and wellness in general. And so for us, through discussion, just really important that be woven into the fabric of the values of this kind of work is this kind of underlying encouragement to be connected with other people, and that this could help to be a vehicle for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, the relational basis of healing.
Yeah. And the personalized care that comes through with your understanding of an individual's context, and then I'm assuming that you are the curators of the playlists, or maybe there's other people on your team that do that process, but it's perhaps informed of the context of the individual that will be receiving that music.
Yeah, for sure. We do a thing that we call a musical intake. Mm-hmm. So there's there's the kind of the assessment and intake that you do with a new client, but a big part of that for us is tell us about your musical preferences. Tell us about your musical listening habits. Do you play a musical instrument? Do you speak foreign languages? Because that might have bearing on what music we can play for you, because we don't want you tripping out on what the lyrics mean. Sure. So the idea is doing a really thoughtful, comprehensive musical intake. And then that doesn't necessarily mean that you're giving people the music that they normally like to listen to. Oftentimes it means you're kind of thoughtfully steering around it, but also steering around things that they might find aversive, that might not be good for them to listen to. And then you start the process, and then you get feedback, and then you have to change things on the fly too. So it's so definitely preparing playlists, but also being prepared to change the playlists in the moment.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate you all sharing about this, and I want to give space for your presentation very soon.
Sure.
But before we do that, I have a few rapid fire questions that I'd like to ask you guys, and just to invite a little bit more personalization of your own psychedelic experiences and preferences. So this is what we call the Change Your Lens section of our interview. And so the first question I will ask you is, who is your greatest influence and why?
Helen, Bonnie.
I can think of two. I'd say my most recent greatest influence is Steve Roach. Having had the chance to see him with Mad, and then also having had the chance to interact and talk to him since then and study with him a little bit. Just learning more about his understanding and conception of sound, and how we interact with it, and how it interacts with us, and how to tap into it, has really deepened things for me on the level of music. Yeah. And I'd say another great influence would be Matt. And over the years, just really talking about music and healing in the way we have, and learning so much from you, and your extensive knowledge and experience has been an exciting journey that I'm looking forward to continuing.
Oh, you're gonna make me cry. No, I mean, I feel like when we met, we're like, do we start a band? And then we realized halfway along that MCPI and the Ketamine Providers Network and Los Angeles Community Ketamine Clinic, these are our bands. It's like, so we are playing in a band, in a way. So yeah, I mean, like, I feel like we evoke things in each other that wouldn't exist otherwise. So, and then I said Helen Bonney. She was she worked with was it Ralph Metzner and Stan Groff at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Unit, and when all of the doctors were getting together, they would kind of, in a way, it's not so good. They would send her off to like make coffee and take people to like take the wives out to lunch. And in her spare time, while she was doing that, she developed the first ever psychedelic playlists. And she's the fountainhead of psychedelic playlists. We probably wouldn't be using psychedelic playlists without her. And then she went on to create guided imagery and music, which is you should look it up. It's an entire way of psychedelic journeying without active drug sessions. So that's really interesting. There's trainings in it, but she's I mean, super important. And we interviewed, this is not rapid fire, by the way. We interviewed Lisa Summer, who was one of her mentors, and she talked about how Helen Bonney would put on music and lie on the floor and writhe. So she was a real incredible person who was deeply connected to music. Huge inspiration to us. Another patron saint. Yes.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. My next question for you is, if you were on a deserted island, but you're able to bring an album, which is it? And you're able to listen to the album. We don't necessarily know how, but access granted.
What do you think, Mark? That's a messed up question. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like the longest like quadruple set album that I know, because I think I'd want to have duration. But on the other hand, I might choose something that I haven't listened to very much. You introduced a great song to me today on the car ride over. What was the title of that song, the last one we listened to?
Oh, One More Night by Can.
One More Night.
Yeah.
Yeah, what album is that from?
It's called Egi Bamiasi.
I would choose that album.
I would choose John Fahey, Days Have Gone By.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I am going to ask one more question, and you may express in whatever way. It doesn't necessarily need to be rapid. But I want to hear from each of you about a memorable or expansive psychedelic experience you've had personally.
I'll talk about my first ever intramuscular ketamine experience, which Elizabeth was here. She was one of the facilitators, and Mark was part of it. It was a training at Field Trip, and they had the expansiveness of spirit and the courage to let me listen to a Fellini soundtrack for the entire session, which was the Nights of Cabiria soundtrack, which you wouldn't think of this as standard psychedelic playlist material, but I mean, it's one of my favorite records of all time, and I was really in love with it at the time. If it's one of those records that it feels like it microcosmically contains all of human life within it. So that was one of the most profound experiences of my life, and it was one of those experiences in which I realized that we're all the same person, and we just spend a lot of time pretending that we're not. Mm. And that hit me in an extraordinarily powerful way that I'll never forget, and I'm getting chills thinking about it.
Mm.
What's it called again? Sorry.
Oh, the soundtrack? It's Nights of Cabiria, and it's that's the name of the film, and it's by Nino Rota. It's a soundtrack for I think it's a 1959 Fellini movie. Yeah.
The one that comes to me is I had the opportunity in 2011, I believe it was, to go to Peru to go to an ayahuasca center. Deep, well, I would say near Iquitos, so quite deep in the jungle. And the maestro, the ayahuasquero, was, I think he was around 70 and just had this amazing voice and songs, the Icaros. And on one of the nights, his mother came in, and she was in her 90s, I believe, and they were a family, a lineage of maestros. And I remember a moment, I was deep in the medicine, and he started singing, and then she was singing as well, and I heard them singing together, and it just took me to this place that was entirely made of sound. And I remember wondering how old these songs were. And it felt as if they were so old, maybe even older than humanity. And just hearing the power of those voices and these songs, which I knew were so much older than the people singing them, and maybe even older than I could imagine, was one of the most powerful music experiences I've ever had.
Mm. Oh. I felt the ancient energy of whatever songs they were offering you in that space, and both of those experiences sound powerful, and I'm not surprised that they were influenced by music for you too. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your voice with us in this space tonight, and I know you have a really wonderful presentation to offer. After their presentation, we will open up to audience Q&A, so for any curious ones who have a question, the time will come for that once they're complete with their presentation. And I just want to thank you guys again. It's been a joy.
Yeah, thanks for your thoughtful questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so what this is supposed to be is it's supposed to be kind of a primer for using music to support psychedelic experiences. To a large extent, it's based on our clinical training, but this also is totally applicable to self-directed psychonaut type people too. We honor that tradition. You know, I think we all come out of that tradition. It kept it alive through the Prohibition era. So we try to remain open to both ways of working. This is kind of a way to think about it. So we start off with talking about what a playlist is. We're thinking about it in terms of digital music, you know. Back in the day, people like Leo Zeff, Helen Bonny, Stan Groff, they would work with, you know, they would have a bunch of record albums out, and they'd be essentially DJing for people, kind of Jamaican style, one turntable, so they weren't using a fader between them. Or you know, also I would love to get my hands on them, but there's old tapes that belonged to Leo Zeff that he dubbed off of CDs and records, and so they would play those. But we're talking about digital music files, and typically you're working with something like Spotify, iTunes, Ableton. We're working more and more with Tidal because it offers like master quality streaming. You know, it's like $3 more per month. I think it's $13 a month. It's worth every penny in our opinion. Not quite all of the options of Spotify, but if you B Spotify on Tidal sounds better, and this is not something that you have to have a real refined sonic palette to hear. Like you know, people can hear it. Especially you can hear it in the highs, like a hi-hat. You can hear there's this kind of hissy, tiley, unpleasant sound that is digital distortion. You know. So we're going to cover a couple different ways of making playlists. So one is rigid and the other is flexible. We're not the only ones, but we're leaning more and more towards flexible styles. We were trained to think of it rigidly, but we're working more and more flexibly. So the idea of a playlist, how we structure it, it has a shape and a kind of a flow that acts as a carrier wave, pulling the participant's consciousness through a kind of a variety of psychedelic territory. Often it has kind of an orgasm shape of like building intensity, release, and then falling intensity. So yeah, and you also want it to be evoking of strong emotions. You know, I think that there's different people say different things. That there's two different schools, you know, and then there's a whole range in between. But some people say, have said to me, I don't want to feel manipulated by the music. I want to feel like it kind of is an invitation or a seduction to kind of like melt into an experience. Other people will take the eye shade off and be like, it's not strong enough. I need it to be harder. I need it to be more intense, right? So you need to be prepared to provide, you know, and what happens is that people tend to have this, I mean, we all do this, we're humans, right? So we tend to have a way that we respond to things, and then we can assume that that's how everyone ought to have it. So I've met psychedelic therapists who are like, you should never manipulate someone with music. Well, if you hold that belief and you become dogmatic about it, then you're not going to be able to serve the person who needs more intense music, because their experience in that moment is being wrung out like a sponge by the intensity of the music, and that's really important. So I think we're really trying to hold both poles and everything in between, you know, to understand that there is no one way to do this, you know, but it's like it's an openness to a very broad palette. So, correct form for a playlist.
As Matt was saying, the music is so essential to the movement of the journey and through the psychedelic and the psychic space. One thing we like to say is it's as if the music is the river that carries you along. And so you have to think of what that course might look like and might take. I will say it is important to know what psychedelic that you're working with and to kind of have a sense of the arc of that journey and how it works. Some psychedelics may kind of go up and then come down. Others may have waves within them. Others may have a much slower arc. And so to have a sense of the course and trajectory of the psychedelic is helpful. And I'll just say also, it's helpful, even more helpful to know how that psychedelic works with a given individual, because an individual respond to a psychedelic differently, maybe even the same psychedelic at the same dose differently on a different day. So just to be attuned to those variations is incredibly helpful. There's a kind of a number of different ways to look at the structure, and we bring up a few. But the first is this idea of phases, intensity, when it's done, when it might be peaking. So when there could be more tension or more movement, when there's more stillness, when there's initiation, when there's completion. So those can be helpful terms to help guide our conception of it.
Yeah, and then the first bullet point there, that there are ways of organizing the music to better ensure a therapeutic outcome. Like that's been validated clinically in studies. Like it's that if you really are thoughtful and intentional with the music, that people have straight up reductions in symptoms. You know. And I said it before, I'll say it again, like we're not just interested in symptom reduction. We feel like symptom reduction is something that happens on the way to transformation. So, but at the same time, it's not to poo-poo symptom reduction. That's important, and this is the banner under which this stuff is being researched and ultimately legalized. So that's great, but I think oftentimes there's something deeper trying to emerge than just healing.
Exactly, and just on that note, from a clinical perspective, not simply symptom reduction, but symptom evolution, right? If someone is really depressed, and then the depression goes away, but then anxiety comes up, well, you might, if the kind of total symptom number hasn't reduced, maybe that's concerning, but on a deeper level, that's actually a good thing, right? Depression being kind of a more suppressed or repressed state, anxiety being, in some senses, more of a vital state. So it not just to track their kind of absolute level of discomfort, but to notice the trajectory of how their symptoms are evolving. And so to be able to educate them on that. I know you're feeling really uncomfortable now, there's a lot of anxiety, but you'd been depressed for 5 years before that. So this is actually going in the right direction. Let's stay with it and see how this does.
Yeah, and I mean, this is making me think of the quote from Carl Jung. It's like, we don't heal our wounds, we grow bigger than them. So this is the kind of the gold standard multi-phase model for structuring a psychedelic experience. This was used in the 70s. I think this is from a study from 1972, which is from Helen Bonney, who I mentioned before, Walter Pahnke, and Ralph Metzner, who was one of our teachers at CIIS. He has since died. But this is for LSD. So you can see that if you add up all those times, it's quite long, because LSD experiences are quite long. They used the same, I think it was compressed by about 0.7. It was, multiply this by 0.7, and you get you get Bill Richards' playlist for psilocybin at Johns Hopkins, and so you can see there's pre-onset 0 to a half hour, and oftentimes that's music that is kind of like amniotic, womb-like, safe, floating. Onset is the introduction of more energetic elements, oftentimes a little bit of uncertainty or a sense of things beginning to move, and then there's building towards peak intensity, where things begin to actually move and become much more intense, introduction of rhythmic elements, greater expressiveness, and then there's peak intensity of drug action. And one thing that can happen in the peak, like Mark said, is that there can be waves. So it's not always like this. It's kind of like this sometimes. And then re-entry, 4.5 to 7 hours. Oftentimes that's a kind of a return to more tranquil music, but with kind of like heart-centered elements. I think the human voice can be really salient during these phases. And then there's return to normal consciousness, which I think it's almost can be a mirror image of pre-onset, but I think oftentimes with kind of a greater depth, like a kind of like, oh yeah, I have been someplace and seen something. And so oftentimes it's like a little bit more numinous than the pre-onset phase. So there are a bunch of different models out there. Our friend Kellen Thomas has one, Mendel Kaelin has one, there's Bill Richards, but this is Mark's, and I think it's important because it addresses a couple blind spots that the other ones don't, and it's also timed specifically for ketamine.
So this came from really my observations when I started doing ketamine therapy, and applying those other kind of phase models and templates to it, and noticing that it didn't have maybe the precision or guidance that I wanted. So I started paying attention, and what I found was that there seemed to be these stages. These are how I named them. The pre-onset being actually everything until the administration of the medicine. So it's kind of like the idea they're in the hotel lobby, and it's everything before you get in the elevator and go up to whatever floor you're going. The reason that's important is because, to me, it resonates with that idea that the journey begins before the medicine goes in. And I think most people who have done this work believe that and see the importance of that. And that's why we do the preparation work. Because when someone makes an intention to do this kind of work or anything else that's transformative, something changes in that moment of choice and of commitment. And so when someone comes in the room and the music is already there holding that space, that begins something. And for me, it's from the moment that you make contact with a client, it's important to initiate that intentional space. And so the pre-onset music does that, and carries them in. It can provide that transition and that bridge from there they are, and then they settle into that space. You administer the medicine, and there's moments, whether it's, tens of minutes or a few minutes or seconds, whatever it is, depending on the medicine, where the medicine is administered and they're not yet feeling it or not yet sure they're feeling it. Having that consistency of the musical transition really helps with that.
Yeah, like music as a part of the set and setting.
Exactly. Yeah. So the onset, they begin to feel it, and this is for intramuscular ketamine specifically, so 5 to 15 minutes, but also it can be applied to sublingual ketamine. So they can usually begin to feel it at least after 5 minutes. And then the peak, what I've noticed is that there's a physiological peak where they feel the symptoms most physically. And then once they get through that, then they begin to experience the psychological peak or the consciousness peak. And so to be able to match music that carries them along with that kind of movement and honors where they're at and can contain that in those areas. And then the plateau is kind of maybe the beginning of that psychological peak where they're in this state of the most altered or expanded consciousness for that duration. And that is where I think the music can become most expansive, and it can still have some of the movement of the onset and the physiological peak, and then it can also transition into some stillness, but wanting to have a richness and a depth and a complexity to it that really creates the sonic architecture of whatever world they're in. And then the transition is when those peak effects begin to subside, but they're still feeling them quite a bit. And it's kind of an indication that it's kind of I think actually more of an acknowledgement that they're transitioning out of that peak state of expanded consciousness back into the regular consciousness, which doesn't happen right away. And that's why I brought in the landing period, which again is what Matt talked about. Something similar to that initial pre-onset or onset period, but with some kind of acknowledgement that they've been somewhere. It has that more numinous quality and grounds that sense of expansion or spirituality, whatever it is they might have experienced. And then the integration, again, part of that set and setting. So sometimes people will want to talk and share and integrate after their sessions. Sometimes they won't. Either way, though, to continue having that sonic environment, having the music to hold that space and be part of that setting, I found to be quite helpful and I would say even crucial.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a client I was working with recently where I left, he was out of the medicine. He was, sobering up, and I was playing Brian Eno's Thursday afternoon, and he just he's like, is it okay if I do this and he just sat there for like an hour. And it was the music. He was having an experience of the music. He was sort of sitting there, eyes open, listening to the music. And I think if you have some idea that okay, play the silver, we're cutting it off, it's like he would have missed something. There was something that was happening. Something was weaving together in him. I didn't know what that was until we did the integration session in the following week. But that was an important thing for him. It wasn't. I think we ought to think of these medicines as working on us for perhaps hours, days, maybe even weeks or months after they've finished working, right? It's like that the echoes of them can be worked with.
Absolutely, yeah. And as I think we would all agree with, the point of a psychedelic experience is not simply to have had this experience and then go back to whatever consciousness you were in, but to weave that experience into your day-to-day consciousness and take it forward with you. And so how can we speak to that and acknowledge it with the music?
So we talked about, this was sort of timed for, the first one was LSD, more classical psychedelics, ketamine. Now we've got MDMA. This comes out of our training from CPTR. And this was mainly coming from someone who was one of our teachers who worked on a number of MAP studies with MDMA. And the way she worked with it specifically was that she encouraged us to think about the phases for MDMA not as being sequential, one following the next, but they're almost like three different gears on a car. So one is pre-onset, one is beginning to move, and one is really moving, and that you can just sort of toggle. You can toggle through those based on what the journeyer wants. And so it's kind of like, are you good to stay? You typically, you would start them off with pre-onset. And then you would say, do you want to go deeper? Do you want it to be more intense? And that would be beginning to move. And then there's really moving. And I think people have this idea of MDMA being pretty mellow, heart-centered, and so I was like, well, so what does the really moving playlist consist of? I was like, is it just like really, like ambient techno that thumps a little harder, or what is it? And she's like, no. She's like, she was talking about on her playlist that she used Gustav Holst, the Mars from the Planets, right? And so that's like, this is like, the orchestral equivalent of like Slayer. It's like it's really intense music, and it was meant to evoke. For those who've been traumatized, it's an opportunity to engage with those feelings, right? But in the safe container of the MDMA experience. How songs fit together in a sequence. These are sort of like little heuristics, little sort of rules of thumb about how we think of it. In different phases, they're oftentimes held together by similar energetic or rhythmic intensity, expressiveness. So that is oftentimes the sort of the amount of emotion that someone puts into a specific performance. A little hard to describe, but you know it when you hear it, right? It's a subjective thing. Things can often cluster with instrumentation, cultural or other stylistic similarities. One cool thing, this is rare, but sometimes a song ends in one key and the next one begins in the next, and that's like kind of a little Easter egg experience that people can have, right? And sometimes even if you're doing it in Ableton or Spotify has a crossfade feature where songs can kind of be sort of bleed in one into the other, kind of overlap. Here's one thing I really like, and it just was intuitive for me from the very beginning when I started learning about this, was preserving the original track sequence from a record, right? You got to think that the producer and the artist, they've spent so much time thinking about the track that opens the record in the best way, and then how you flow through those tracks, right? And oftentimes there is a kind of there's a kind of psychedelic clinician's wisdom in that you can trust. I think the album Pavilion of Dreams by Harold Budd is a great example of that. Of just like, I've had sessions where I just put on that record and let it roll, and I've never had anyone ask me to change that record. It works every time. It's like silver bullet. We want to avoid dramatic and sudden shifts in musical intensity, or sort of like, big stylistic changes. We talk about this a lot, ask for help or consult, and that doesn't have to necessarily even be with a specialist. It just has to be with someone who can listen to and respond to music. What do you think about this? How does this feel to you? And then I'm thinking about an experience that I had where someone was sitting for me during a ketamine experience, and they had made a playlist for me, and they had made it very thoughtfully up to a certain point, and they had put together all these different songs, and then at a certain point it just shifted for me, and it started to kind of come apart, and I was like, wait, what the hell is going on here? This doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel right. And it started to be a really difficult experience, and the words kept on going through my head. My guide has lost his way. My guide has lost his way. And afterwards, I checked in with the person, and they were like, and I was like, around this point, there's something about the music shifted, and it knocked my experience off track. And he was honest enough to cop to the fact. He's like, yeah, I kind of stopped knowing what I was doing. I just kind of started throwing songs on there, And like, I was acutely aware of that. And how I was aware of it, I'm not sure. But I mean, it was like totally clear to me in the moment. And it was right where he said that he started just kind of more thoughtlessly just being like, we'll just kind of pad this out, So it speaks to, I think, that people in these psychedelic experiences, like they're taking things in very high cognitive resolution, right? And they're very sensitive. They're very sensitive to attunement. And so I think what happened there was it was a loss of musical attunement, and I felt it immediately.
And just to add to that, as a strategy, if you're going to be doing this work with others, think like a DJ and have those albums and those songs that you can use and how they're generally received. Have your pavilion of dreams so that if you find yourself in the situation where Matt Sitter was, you can say, you know what, I'm not attuned, but I'm going to try this, and I'm familiar with it, and I know how it usually lands, and I resonate with it, and I will pay attention if whoever I'm sitting for resonates with it. And so just to try and avoid being in the situation that sitter was, and just really paying attention to how is this landing with this person, because you may be going through and you may find a song that actually really is good for them, but then you may change it because you don't know what you're doing. But rather than knowing what you're doing, feel what is happening in the room. And what can give you more confidence and calm is to have those songs and those albums that you are familiar with, you've worked with, and you can say, I can put this on and I'm pretty sure of what idea, the effect this will have, the space this will hold, and it will give me the time to regroup, to attune, and to strategize about what I want to play next.
Yeah, we call those, in some cases, having music on deck that is reliably calming and soothing. We call that rescue music. Just like in the emergency medicine, they'll have rescue medicines that are calming and soothing for people who are freaking out. There are certain reliable pieces of music. Steve Roach's not Pavilion of Dreams, Structures from Silence is a great one. No one's ever asked me to change that record. Every time you put it on, you see a wave of relief rolling through people's bodies. So you can, a lot of the time, the interventions that you can make in the moment are musical. It doesn't necessarily have to even be anything that you say. It can be just, you can be attuning with music. So what is the correct music to use, and is this a trick question? We like to think about music in the most expansive terms. So there's not a correct music. Again, I think certain dogmatic-minded people will kind of be like, oh, well, ketamine, this is a thing that a lot of people say, ketamine works well with electronic music, right? I think that there's some truth to that, right? I think ketamine, in my experience, makes you very sensitive to little variations in timing. And so there's something about the metronomic timing of electronic music that is really good, right? But then again, I had someone recently, in the middle of a session, tear the mask off and be like, Mahler, Adagio for strings. And I was like, okay, here we go, and then had this profound transpersonal experience, Now, if I was an electronic music ketamine dogmatist, I'd be like, no, that's not the thing for you. But I mean, I think what we're finding is that there's different things for different people, right? I mean, seems to be the lesson of psychedelics, or one of them is to respect infinite variations in what it means to be human. So yeah, I don't think there is a correct music, but there are musical qualities that do better or worse support beneficial psychedelic experiences. And we're going to discuss them in negative and positive qualities in the next slides.
Just to add to that, that range, I've had people who have wanted really hard driving techno dance music, and that's really been their zone. And I've had people that want basically nature sounds, maybe with a little bit of flute, or maybe just the sound of the ocean and crickets. And so sometimes they'll know that and they'll tell you, and that's great. Sometimes they might not even know that. And so you have to be willing to just go beyond the boundaries of what you would have expected to play and be like, well, maybe I'll try this song. And just like this hard 4 on the floor number. And they're like, perfect. I want the rest of the journey to be like this. Okay, great. And so to be willing yourself to have an expansive, or at least an adventurous sense of music and what is possible and what can be played. Yeah. That said, there are some things that we've generally found to be more preferential, more beneficial, and less.
Yeah, right. And we'll start with the less, which is the negative qualities. These are the things you want the music to not be. You don't want it to be just dysphoric or scary. I mean, I say that these are kind of like basic safety considerations for starting out with someone. You know, in working with someone, there might be a type of darker music that you agree to use, you know, but I think there has to be a lot of consent. You know, maybe it's almost like practicing BDSM or something, where there's got to be like a safe word or something like that. But you know, I don't want to make it sound like it's off limits, but I would not start with it. So dysphoric or scary, jarring, and then expected or overly familiar. You don't want to just be playing people what they listen to in the car. You know, like you want it. You know, the way people have been thinking about this for about 50 years now is that new music and novel musical experiences equals experiences of your own personal unknown. And then poor sound quality. We talked about this. I'm a fan of lower fidelity analog recordings, not so much digital. So you want to maintain sound quality, especially now that we live in the digital age. And then also you don't want it to be in a language that people understand. But, you know, like I did a holotropic breathwork training with a friend of mine from India, and they started playing, you know, the kind of preferred, you know, Groff style electronic music with like the Hindi singing over it, and she was lying there being like, God damn it! Like I was listening to this stupid song, like about this love song, and I was trying to go into. She was trying to have some other kind of experience. She was being taken somewhere else, but she was tripping out on the vocals. And the presumption there was that, well, no one speaks Hindi. We're in California. Well, people do speak Hindi here, so you have to consider this. You know, so yeah, these are all the negative qualities.
Just to add to that,
please.
You know, in terms of the poor sound quality, one way to look at it is it doesn't sound good, which in my opinion is true. Another way to look at it is that there's actually less sonic information happening. So lower quality digital music actually has less information, even though it seems to have, you know, listening, because things are sampled so fast, listening to it over time, we think there's a whole picture, but the nervous system is so sensitive, and in that state so exquisitely sensitive, it's receiving an incomplete picture. And so that has an effect. We don't know exactly what effect that has, but when Matt talks about harm reduction, just think of it like that. Imagine, you know, walking through the world and you're wearing those glasses with lines on them, and you can kind of see things, but you can't really see everything, and what that feels like. That's the effect that lower quality digital music has. And then just the other thing to underline is what Matt said about consent. Think about sound and music as touch, because it is. It's sound pressure waves that are literally physically touching you and interacting with your body. So if you think about it that way, I think it will help your level of attunement and sensitivity towards what the person's experience is.
So positive qualities. You know, you want to have an option for feeling like a broad range of human emotions. This is, again, subjective, but at the same time, it's the kind of thing that you know it by the response that it gets, that you're getting from the person that you're playing music for. And so really, I think another thing that we really seek to develop in MCPI through training is to have people really learn about music and to learn what they love, and to put together huge musical libraries and to some extent internalize them in their heads, so they're like, I know that this thing is going to be good right now, or there's a really good chance that it could be good, or that this could be good right here, you know. Yeah, and oftentimes these are things that you've tested over and over and over and over again for years, like, you know, especially if it's your work. Another positive quality is novel or unfamiliar. We talked about sort of the novel being a pathway into unknown aspects of ourselves that we're looking to get into in psychedelic psychotherapy. And then the last one is timbre. This comes out of Mendel Kalin's research from Imperial College. Timbre is the sort of the texture of a note, or the sort of the tone color color of a note, whereby you can play an A flat on a violin and an A flat on a saxophone, and you can tell the difference between them. It's the timbre. Like, it's the same note, but the timbral differences between the two. Some people say timbre. I like the pretentious French pronunciation. What they found in Mendel Kaelen studies, which involved fMRI scans of the brain, was that the more timbrally rich certain notes were in psychedelic psychotherapy sessions, I think it was with LSD that they were doing this, that not only did parts of the brain light up in ways that they don't typically light up, they lit up and then connected and began communicating. So we're talking about specifically visual centers for visualization and centers for memory, right? And so these are these kind of unprecedented opportunities for healing states. But what they found was that the more timbrally rich the music was, the better the response was, and ultimately less symptoms afterwards, on the depression scales, going way down. I think the thing here that's interesting are just examples of timbrally interesting music. I think a great example of this is Terry Riley or Pauline Oliveros. They both play in just intonation, which is a different tuning system. It sounds kind of laser beamy, bagpipey. They make these big, long compositions that are perfect for this kind of work. Other things with timbral content, sort of overtone content that normal instruments don't have. So unfamiliar timbre. A glass harmonica is a great example. It's a classical instrument. It's kind of like playing wine glasses almost. Synthesizers, I think, offer a lot of timbral richness. I mean, incredible amounts of it. Steve Roach leverages that all the time. Orchestral music, that's not really my thing, but I think, when you have all those instruments playing together, there's this incredible sort of full spectrumness that comes out of that. Music for ritual purposes. I mean, I think there's a whole variety, and you'll know it when you hear it, right? Oftentimes, it's a feeling that comes out of it, and again, it's this thing that Mendel Kaelen observed at Imperial College. It's a synergistic effect, which is that if you take LSD on its own, it has this amount of an effect on the brain. If you listen to music on its own, it has this amount of an effect on the brain. And if you do the two at the same time, all of a sudden they're multiplying against each other, where all of a sudden it's almost exponential in terms of the effect. So we talked about this a little bit in MCPI, ways to individualize. We do a thoughtful musical intake, and we've actually developed an intake tool. So there's like an assessment for how to get information about people's musical life, really, all the different details, habits of listening, what preferences, if they play instruments, that kind of thing. And it's coming from Bonnie and Pankey again. Yeah, this is a quote, I think, from Groff. It's useful to discuss the subject's tastes in music before the session and get an idea of his or her preferences, idiosyncrasies, and general level of musical sophistication. The actual selection usually reflects more the sitter's understanding of the process than the experience choice. So you're not always giving people what they want. Another way to individualize is wave paths. We both worked with it. We both have done some consulting work for Mendel Kaelen, who developed wave paths, which is a generative sort of AI-based way of creating musical trip experiences for people. Mark has more experience with it than I do. I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, WavePaths is interesting technology, and I think quite useful in certain cases. I look at WavePaths as kind of a song or an album or a genre of its own. So in certain cases, wonderful to use, and in other cases, I would probably choose to use, pre-recorded music. And what it does is it allows you to change, set a certain amount of parameters that will determine the course of a journey. And so it maps out this whole thing. And so you can press play and just let it go. You can also change those parameters over time in real time. And it does a nice slow transition. It's not jarring. And so if you sense someone is maybe becoming more activated, or maybe they want music that's more uplifting, or maybe they want music that's more sad and contemplative, then you can change those parameters in real time. And then it will generate from a number of samples. It will combine them in I guess, intelligent way to match the parameters that you've set based on what you've observed. And so that's useful because it is quite quick and effective, and then it also is good training to, without having to have a whole library of music that you've categorized and memorized, and this goes here and this is good for this moment, to just know a few basic parameters and say, this is what I'm sensing. I think this mood would be good for it. Initiate change. And so it's a great way to get into the practice of making live real-time changes in someone's musical experience as you're sitting for their journey.
So I already covered this in a way. It's like these are rigid styles of playlist making. This mostly comes out of research protocols where they're trying to control for the music as a variable, right? And this is kind of, MAPS has moved away from it. It's like there's a lack of attunement, and I think we're ultimately getting less good responses from people when you just gave them a playlist and you're like, this is your experience. We're not going to change this necessarily. So it's kind of a. Some people still think in these terms. I think another way you'll get this is you'll find a clinician who's intimidated by the idea of having to maybe make changes in the moment, right? And so they're just like, you know what, I just want to have a playlist and just use that, and they'll just deal with it. I don't think that that's good. I think that people need to have options, even if it's just another playlist or another couple playlists. But in general, these are the reasons why someone would use a sort of rigid style playlist. But everyone else is moving towards flexible styles. So really speaking towards flexible styles, we just have a bunch of quotes. Groff talks about responding sensitively to phase, intensity, and content of the subject's experience. Leo Zeff, I loved him. They called him the secret chief. He ran underground sessions out of his place in Oakland and in Bolinas for years. And he had this very unpretentious way. He'd just be like, listen, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to play you some music. If you like it, I'll rewind the tape and we'll listen to it again. If you don't like it, I'll change the tape, So it wasn't, there's something about that style that's very appealing. It's like unpretentious, it's very human. And it was kind of less hierarchical. Like I'm Moses coming down off the mountain with the tablets of what your musical experience is supposed to be. It's like he's very much like, let's do this thing. Let's listen to some music, So I really like that. There's a great book called The Secret Chief where they talk a lot about music in it too. So yeah, more quotes from Zeff. I think problems with flexible styles is that it takes some effort on the part of the clinician. You can get distracted. If you're trying to manipulate musical technology while you're in the middle of a session, and then other people are as we said before, intimidated by lack of musical knowledge or technical knowledge. So I think these are all things to practice. These are all things to consult about. So I think, like I said before, make the playlists ahead of time, be prepared to change them, and also consult, ask people questions. Be part of a community. This is kind of like our little junk drawer of things that we didn't know where to put elsewhere. So I think this is kind of the top one is like an MCPI. I think it is addressed in MCPI, which is that like the therapist should almost be like a kind of a musicologist who's constantly taking in new music and constantly expanding like what they can offer to other people. Requests from the participant. I've been more and more open to that. I think I was much more of the mystery school before that, of like, I'm going to take you into the mystery. But, I think as time goes on, and if someone wants to place a song of theirs or call it out in the middle of a session, I think I realized that I was maybe missing an opportunity. That there's a certain amount of wandering in the mystery, but there can be a certain amount of connecting to something that's deeply familiar that is just super powerful. And so again, just more and more flexibility, more and more variation. Like that's how I'm thinking of this. Yeah, okay, here's something from hypnosis training that I had years ago, which is that, it's like that in order to successfully induce someone else into a trance, you have to enter into a trance yourself, and that it's a kind of a state transfer that happens, right? It's a, the pendulums that end up swinging together, right? So I according to that logic, I don't tend to use music on people that wouldn't work on me. So, and that oftentimes the way that I test that is by that sort of minor orgasm of chills that you have when you're listening to really good music, and you're like, ugh, and you feel it. the shiver goes all through your body. Like that's the tuning fork of response to music, and you should trust that. It's like it shouldn't just be an airy intellectual thing. Like you need to feel it. Practice and consult. Those are the two final things. Yeah, practicing doing this, and then consulting with other people. I say that again and again. Consult. Don't operate in a vacuum. Anything else?
Just to really underscore that, what you said about, if you're resonating with the music, there's this idea of co-regulation, which is our nervous systems regulate and resonate with each other. So that can be amplified, and whoever you're sitting for can experience your resonance. Likewise, taking their requests, allow yourself to resonate with what resonates for them and with them. That might take you to a new place. And then they're also trusting that if there's something that feels off in the music or something, and you're like, I don't know, should I just let it play or not? You might want to have that inquiry and say, does this really feel right for this moment for this person? And if it doesn't, you can fade that song out and fade the next one in. Again, you want to get good at the fade. Avoid things that are jarring, so just to press next track in the middle of this one's playing. You really want to fade the volume out and fade it back in. But if it doesn't feel right, trust that. You don't need to act right in that moment, but be thinking, okay, what is the next music? What's the next energy I want to bring into this moment? So resonate.
I think you hit it right on the head when you said therapists should be more or less a DJ, musicologist. And so a person that's not, I guess that's something you should ask, but I feel they just go on Spotify and then all of a sudden, I felt good on this one, so I'm going to play this one. And I don't know, I feel like it didn't work. Quote, work. I did feel like it was off. And then I asked, well, what other playlist should I do? And then you search Spotify, KAT, and then it's overwhelming. So should I listen to it beforehand going into it? Because as you said, it's kind of expensive. You don't want to just, create a random playlist because you don't want to botch that medicine up, right? But what would you recommend regarding how to choose, just for Spotify or SoundCloud?
Absolutely, that's a great question.
And real quickly, do you guys have stuff on Spotify or SoundCloud, or is it just Tidal?
I think we could put some playlists on Spotify.
Okay.
But I will say that we have a zine here. We'll talk more about this when Matt comes back, and he'll explain it further. But we have a zine here for sale that is 49 albums that we think are amazing for psychedelic therapy. And so this could be a great place to start, playlists in paper form.
They're handmade.
They are, yes.
Printed on my printer in my apartment.
Yeah. Folded by our own
full
hands. But I want to make sure to answer your question. Were you talking from the perspective of the client or the person who's journeying, or the sitter, the person who's sitting for the client, or either one?
The person experiencing the journey.
Okay, so it's what the message we're sending is that we're encouraging the therapist or the sitter or the guide to take responsibility for that. But let's say they don't, and you want to take responsibility and agency as the person who's journeying. What you can do is you can introduce this idea of the musical intake to your therapist and say, music is really important to me. I'm very sensitive to it, and I know it has such a big impact on my journey. And so I'd like to talk with you about that. And if they don't really have a sense of how to navigate that, then you can have the sense of how to navigate that. And what you might want to do is go through all these CAP or CAT playlists and listen to each song. You don't have to listen to the whole song. Scrub to somewhere in the middle, take 10 or 20 seconds with it. How do I feel with this? And again, go with that very embodied response do I resonate with this? Does it feel good? And this is what I encourage people to do in general, even with the playlist that I send them to re-listen to, is to take whatever songs from these playlists and make your own playlists from those. And you could even make palettes, right? Oh, these are this kind of song and this kind of mood. And so one approach is to kind of prepare the playlist yourself, just having, heard what we've said and connected to it and learn more about it. Excuse me. Another thing is you could ask the sitter, hey, could you send me some of the playlists? I'd like to do some pre-listening with them, which again is part of our MCPI method, and just see which ones you really like. Or even just scan them to see if there are any songs on them you don't like. Hey, this playlist is great, but can you take these 3 songs out of it? I really didn't like them and don't think I'd like to journey with them. And then I would say also feel really empowered in the moment when you're journeying to say, this song isn't working for me. Can we go to the next one? Which works if there are other good songs on that playlist or songs that work for you, but not if maybe there are none, and then the guide doesn't have any playlist or songs that would work for you. So
this zine is something that Mark and I collaborated on. Mark contributed his 7-phase model to it. I wrote, basically it's 49 music reviews enthusiastically recommending certain specific pieces of music, albums specifically, because I think algorithms bury albums. They tend to privilege songs, and you don't tend to end up learning about albums, and musicians think in albums, right? And so you end up missing a lot of stuff. So basically this is a big, it's to some extent a guide on how it fills in a certain gap of in what we were presenting tonight, in that you get a lot of our taste in this, and that's, I think at this point, certain people come to us because of our musical taste, because that allows people to have certain specific experiences. So that's what this is, we worked very hard on this, and we're very proud of it. So this is one of the release events for it. So, any other questions?
When you do a session, is it just wall-to-wall music, or do you take a moment and say, well, how do you feel about this, or any other type of therapy, or is it just music?
In general, it's just music. Then again, I think it's also nice to create spaces where maybe there is no music. I tend to, as the ketamine is taking effect, I'll kind of do like a 10 or 15 minute check-in. But other than that, it's if they come out and have something to say, because I think the idea of psychedelic psychotherapy is that during the active session, the person's supposed to be in there, immersed, feeling the feelings, going into the visions, going into the memories, going into all that stuff. So I'm not doing a lot of, we were told not to anxiously check in, like, are you okay? Are you okay? It's more kind of like allowing them to have the experience and trusting that they're going to have the experience that they need to have, and that you'll work with it during the integration phase. Yeah, but I think moments of silence can be incredible. I think moments where there's nothing, moments where there's maybe just the sound of running water. So I'm open to that. I think you might get an idea of whether you'd want to do that during the musical intake, or during an integration session of like, I wish it was more spacious, or is there maybe some time where I could just like cut the music and like have 5 minutes to just kind of just be in silence, So definitely open to that, enthusiastic about it, but I want to trust the sense of the room and either what the client is saying to me or what they've said to me previously.
And what's the price range for sessions? And what would it be? You mentioned like downtown LA for low-income people in a park. That sounds fascinating. I'd contribute towards that.
We have not worked out with finality what that price range is, but we are aiming for, because I think the market rate for CAP, or ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, it's about $1,200 a session, right? Not everyone can afford that. We're aiming for, and like we have not opened the clinic yet. So like there's going to be a certain amount of like figuring things out in the early stages, but we're aiming for $150 to $300. So we'll see if that sticks, but we want to offer it sliding scale. So depending on what people's means are and what they're available, what they can pay. Yeah.
I was wondering, I guess, two things, whether in onset and landing you ever return to the same pieces and tie that up, and also whether in landing, I'm mostly familiar with ayahuasca ceremonies, and usually in that coming out period, lyrics would start to come in recognizable languages, but never before. Do you ever introduce lyrical material, and is that something you pre-negotiate, or is that something you just pretty much blanket stay away from?
I only do it if someone requests it. If someone requests it, or if it's kind of agreed to ahead of time. So it requests in the moment or requested ahead of time. I would hate to spring lyrics on someone. Like, I've had someone do that to me, where like all of a sudden I'm listening to Frank Sinatra, and like I love Frank Sinatra, but like no, it wasn't where I was, So it's like the potential for misattunement is huge with that. So I would only do that. With prompting. And sorry, what was the first question again?
Whether you return ever between onset and landing.
Yes. Yes, I have done that before. Used the same music for onset and landing. Oftentimes it's again at the behest of the journeyer, being like, can I hear that song again? Because there's often a kind of thing of like feeling like, oh, I'm returning to that kind of tranquil place that I started out in, and that's really good, So less inclined to do it on my own, but fully enthusiastic to do it if I'm prompted to. Yeah.
Regarding comboing psychedelics, we've done regarding the darkness of the journey. We've done MDMA and psilocybin. And I know there's a purpose for that. And it's, for me, I almost embraced the dark. I was, at least myself, was more willing to sit with it and embrace it and then dig deeper into it. So I guess my question is, would you happen to recommend that, or have you had an experience doing that with ketamine? Because the reason I ask is, I've been fearful when I do that, when I transcend, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, I don't like this at all. And I've ripped my mask off before, and that was bad. And then the person that was assisting me, no, put it back on, stick with it. Like, okay. And then I've done it by myself. It's the same thing. It was like, I do not like this. To embrace it with the music, when I put, not dark music on, but, sounds to make me think about darker things. Yeah. Would you recommend like MDMA with ketamine?
I mean, we haven't really been able to in our clinical practice, since we're like above ground practitioners, gather research on that, what do you call it? Empirical research, where we observe these things, There is one thing that I wonder with the darkness, right? Is that I think sometimes certain people are like, I need to go into this thing and I need to reckon with it and I need to pass through it and release it. And I've known people who've had those experiences with certain psychedelics, and it's actually just like LSD, for instance, right? Like I know people who, someone in particular who has really difficult experiences with LSD and kept going back to it, traumatizing themselves over and over and over again, and believing that they were supposed to have some experience that someone like Stan Grof would have with LSD, and they were like, I'm supposed to be like Stan Grof, and what I said to that person was, you're not Stan Grof, and that different people have different allies. Different people have different medicines that agree with their systems, right? So again, not having a kind of an idea that there's a kind of a one-size-fits-all with any one of these medicines. So I don't know if that's what's happening, but I think if someone's having repeated really negative experiences with something, the first thing I'll look at is I'll question the medicine. I'll be like, is this the right medicine for you? Because some people will be like, I had a ketamine experience. It was like the classic, like paint on drying on a wall for an hour, right? And I felt weird and gross afterwards. Other people have their first ketamine experience and they're like, it was so spiritual, it was so connected, it was so profound, right? And it's like, that speaks more to how the person metabolizes it and how it interacts with their whole system, right? So, I sometimes, when I hear someone struggling with darkness again and again and again, and it's not resolving, I think sometimes maybe there's another path, and because sometimes when I have seen people, myself included, trying to reconcile with some kind of darkness with a specific molecule, it's oftentimes that it can happen in a way that doesn't have to necessarily have that utterly terrifying effect that leaves you rattled afterwards. If you feel rattled and questioning your sanity and dreading the next trip, again and again and again and again, I have serious questions about that. Yeah.
Hi. My question is about integration. Let's say a person has their experience, and then a week later or a month later, they're doing integration. Would you recommend the same music that they had during their experience, or would you choose different music for it?
One way that we work is to use the same music from that experience. And I might even recommend that, and typically do, to happen sooner than a month or even a week. I think a good time frame is within the next few days or even the next day can be a really fertile time to revisit that same playlist and connect to that place. And not only to do that once, but to do that at intervals. And that can be, in the MCPI method, a really powerful form of integration. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything to add?
So I have a couple of questions. Thank you. Fantastic. First is, I'm really in awe of the power of music and all of this. And music is the medicine, so set and setting, and the therapist, and the relationship, and all that. So one question, do you share your musical intake? Because I'd love to really know what kind of questions to ask. So.
Send you a copy.
Great.
We can send you a copy. But it's gonna. I think we're going to be releasing it with the book when it comes out. Yeah.
Okay, but I'll get my own copy ahead of time.
Sure.
Okay. The other part that I really struggle with, and I understand how important it is to personalize the music, is how the client steps out of the space when they're so busy focusing on, I don't like this song, could I have a different song? Maybe can we try this song? So there's where I hesitate to get into too much curating of the music during this session, because you want them to be deep in the experience and not concentrating so much on the playlist. So how do we find that middle ground?
Well, I'll say this. Most sessions I just put on the playlist, and there's almost no adjustments that need to happen. I think we tend to focus a lot on the times when we like, what do you do when there is a request for a change to be made, but maybe there's something about that level of focus on it that makes it seem like it happens more often. But sometimes you just put on the playlist and it's like, my favorite thing to do at this point is to just DJ for people, is to come in with no playlist and just start playing music for people, and oftentimes, I'd say more than half the time, there's no issue, and the other 30% of the times, it's kind of like just one song where they're like, I don't know how I feel about this, and you're like, can you hang with it? And they're like, yeah, and then it's fine, and then there's maybe 20% after that where it's like, I need you to change the song, that kind of thing. And how do you work with that, I mean, does that seem like it's pretty accurate in terms of the breakdown?
Yeah, I agree with that, and we'll just add that I think those opportunities can also be an opportunity for something relational with the person. And for me, I'm always thinking about the pillars of safety, agency, and connection. You've heard me talk about that. And so to have them, so the whatever they're experiencing, including the music, should feel safe. And if it doesn't, then they should feel the agency to speak up. There are some moments, and we've written about this, and we'll probably publish it as well, where I've, if it's been like a very like activating music and is challenging for them, where I've actually asked if they're willing to stay in it. The important thing there is to, one, actually give them agency, and if they're like no, then don't be like, well, too bad. It's like, okay, I respect your choice. And two, to give them a sense of when it will end. I know that this might be challenging for you. I have a feeling it could be good. Would you be open to being with this music for another 2 minutes or 1 minute or 20 seconds? And then we're going to do something that I really am sure will feel a lot better for you. Would you be willing to just get through this because I believe it will be therapeutic for you? Then they get to make that choice. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is where they're kind of like, I don't like this music, what's next? That might be about the music, but it might be about something else, as you know. And so to explore that in whatever way feels right. Say, yeah, I'm happy to change the music. At one point, and maybe you say this in the moment or maybe you don't, I think you'll know as a therapist, but the conversation around, I noticed that you're never satisfied with the music and you always want to change it. What do you think is going on there? Do you want to make a playlist for next time? Or would you be willing to go through a whole playlist that I do? How's the dose for you? So to kind of see if it's actually about the music or if it's about maybe something else. And then to just have the sense, which I think comes with experience, about, okay, well, what is kind of the relational dynamic going on here? It maybe the thing is for me to say, you know what, I really understand that you want to change the music, but maybe it could be good time. Maybe it could be good this time for us to just really get through the song. What do you think about that? Or maybe the right thing to just be like, absolutely, let's keep going until we find something that's right for you. And so knowing what's therapeutic for that individual, which again comes with experience and working with that person. Is that kind of answer the question? Okay. Yeah.
One more technical question. Are you having headphones and ambient dual listening? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Depending on the setting.
Yeah.
Okay.
At LACKC. Sorry, at LACKC we're planning on doing very low level ambient, but then with immersive headphones because it's on Sunset Boulevard. It's like there's street noise, So the over the ear headphones are important, but we're not doing noise canceling. And then for other events, we've bought. We have a Mobius system that's being built for us right now. It's a very fancy stereo, and then we're also Oswald Mills, this audio company in New York, is gifting us this other very fancy set of speakers. So there will be events where it's just in the room. So and I look forward to playing around with that more. I think it's cool to have both because I like to be able to track the person's experience. They're under headphones, they can take it off, stay in the experience, but it's maybe a little less immersive. But I know where they are too. Like I'm like, oh, we're at this point of the song. It's not just a kind of a little thing on a screen moving along, and I'm like, oh, we got 2 minutes left. It's like I'm feeling it along with them.
Well, it's that resonance that you want to be with them in the music.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, it might be also kind of a therapeutic or clinical decision. And so often for people's very first time and journey, I'll say, let's just do it ambient, and then I'm here, and you can hear me, I can hear you. And if you want to talk to me, it's direct, it's immediate. If it turns out they're the kind of person that is in their journey for an hour without saying a word, great, maybe that's a headphones thing, and they're totally good with that. Likewise, in remote journey work, we're supervising remotely. It's they're wearing headphones, that makes the most sense. And it can actually be great for them to be able to hear both the music in their headphones and your voice in the headphones. Now you're very close to them, they can talk to you. So there's different scenarios in which it works, and so it could depend on what is a good clinical decision, what's best therapeutically for that individual in that session.
I had 2 more questions. One is quick. Is Bluetooth as much the enemy of fidelity as poor encoding?
I think Bluetooth is getting better. I still don't trust it. I've had Bluetooth headphones just shut off capriciously. I'm like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
So and then I don't like relying on batteries. That skeeves me out too. So I like, I grew up analog, so like I like cables. I feel like I can really trust that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. That, and also I wish I feel silly for not remembering her name. Old school, mostly psilocybin psychedelic leader, and was very much into the chaos period, like playing Demanda Gaules or having this jarring period. And I've sat in psilocybin sessions that are going by kind of that playlist protocol, and I notice you aren't heading into that territory. Is that kind of research-based or more? I guess I ask this in part because in my own psychedelic history, I got used enough to suffering that I got way too good at it.
Yeah, right. Be careful what you get good at.
I got really good at like suffering a lot. So I am intrigued by the fact that you don't have the chaos period, and that that doesn't appear in your playlist. I mean, I see it peak. It's moving up in energy, but she was describing it literally as chaos, where it is something deliberately jarring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something to work up to. I mean, this is all kind of like, I want to say that this is kind of like a safe parameters for kind of a baseline psychedelic experience. I mean, I value something like the chaos period. I mean, like, I like Diamanda Galas. I like Coil. I've tripped to Coil before. It's like, it's weird. It's dark. It's, so like, I mean, Terence McKenna, there's actually a great interview of Terence McKenna interviewing Coil. And Terence McKenna says, Coil is my favorite band because Coil is so weird. So he wasn't afraid of the dark either. He talked about the strange dark, not the cruel, not the darkness of human cruelty, and but the like the sort of this germinative darkness. So and of mystery and the unknown, right? So I mean, I think for me, chaos maybe looks a little bit more like Electric Miles or something like that, like Bitches Brew or On the Corner or something like that. But I'm definitely not against that. But I think I would not start there, and I would not tell people to start there. I think it's something you need to approach gradually. Yeah.
And if I could just add, if it's something that you're exploring in your own journey work, it could be good to experiment with having that a different placement within the journey. Do I like doing that in the beginning of the journey, kind of in the first third or the peak? Is that a middle thing? Is that like the last part of the journey for me? Probably not for me. But to just get a sense of what works for you in terms of the timing. And then again, I just agree with Matt that usually I would consider that kind of a more advanced or something for more experienced journeyers. I wouldn't necessarily start there, again, just to establish a sense of safety, and this is something that's safe and you don't have to suffer through too much and can be therapeutic without intense suffering. Not that intense suffering should always be avoided. Sometimes it can be deeply therapeutic to go as deeply as you can into suffering and experience yourself come out the other side. That can be profound. So.
But I think it's smart and insightful for you to realize that you got a little too good at it, because it can become its own rigid limiting thing, and you can miss other aspects of your wholeness, which is, it's more than just suffering, right? There's also, I'm guessing there's weird parts and ecstatic parts, and it's like yeah.
And just to add to that, just a general question, is someone willing and able to experience as much joy as they are suffering. And so I think to be able to and willing to go as deeply into whatever aspect and sector of emotionality.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah.